The enemies of democracy in America today are the Democrats. The Democratic Party, absurdly misnamed, is now the greatest threat to democracy in America. Hello everyone, welcome to the Steve Hilton Show. I'm going to adapt a phrase that has become well known. They meant it seriously. It's now become the subject of mockery. It's the slogan of the Washington Post. They say democracy dies in darkness. And I'm going to adapt it and say democracy dies where there are Democrats. Because these Democrats who just endlessly lecture us about how they're there to protect democracy, and there was all these threats to democracy, and Trump's a threat to democracy, and Gavin Newsom in his State of the State speech this week, to the end of last week in California, saying that the Republicans are a threat to democracy. Everyone's undermining democracy. Everyone's undermining democracy except them, in their view. Except it happens to be the exact opposite. Because, in fact, when you look at actual threats to actual democracy right now in America, it turns out that the people behind these threats, the people who are actually undermining democracy, are the Democrats. You see it here in California at the state level. You see it nationally with the Democrats. I mean, we've been through all the examples so many times. There's new ones being added all the time. And you just have to go back to their attempts to interfere through their allies in the FBI and the CIA and the security state in the 2016 election, with the Russia hoax and all that, in the 2020 election with the FBI, and the way that they tried to crush any knowledge of information that would be harmful to Joe Biden, their preferred candidate, that's coming out of the Hunter Biden laptop, which they, of course, have decided to tell us was all Russian disinformation. That operation, as we now know, initiated by Antony Blinken, who's now the Secretary of State. And you had all the intelligence chiefs all lining up to do that. All of that, a threat to democracy. The censorship, not just beyond the evidence of Joe Biden's corruption, his family corruption that was there on his son's laptop. Beyond that, the censorship of anything that would question their narratives that they wanted to put out on the pandemic. We've been through all of this, right? They're the ones who've been trying to suppress information that doesn't help their cause. They're the ones who've been trying to use whatever means they can to win elections and to support their candidates and to get the opponents that they fear out of the race. And of course, we saw it most blatantly this time around in the presidential election, where they're using all these bogus lawsuits to try and interfere in the election. And that's not just a partisan point of view. You look at how CNN's legal analyst, Eli Honig, for example, laid out in specific detail, forensic detail, how the Alvin Bragg case was just totally bogus and should never have been brought in the first place. All of this is an assault on our democracy. You see it here in California, most blatantly going on right now before our eyes. These people who have the nerve to lecture us about our democracy. I mean, any time that the people of this state of California try and do something to push back against the disastrous consequences of their one-party rule, they say, no, you can't do that. We're going to crush the expression of democratic voices, democratic in the small sense, expressed through, for example, ballot initiatives. That's the mechanism here in California where the people can actually make a policy change where they feel, if they feel that their elected representatives aren't doing the job. And you see it time and time again. The Democrats in power, the Sacramento Democrats, who lecture us about how they're saving democracy. When it comes to things they don't agree with, no, we actually hate democracy. So, for example, the people of Huntington Beach, back in March, a city in Orange County, passed voter ID in a ballot initiative. They voted for it. They said, we want voter ID in our elections here in Huntington Beach. Guess what the Democrats in Sacramento did? They said, oh, you can't do that. We're going to sue you to stop you from doing that. And they started the process of bringing in legislation to stop anywhere else doing the same and following suit. So the people have spoken. And as that famous saying goes, I think it's from a British left-wing politician after an election defeat, he said, the people have spoken, the bastards. Well, Same kind of attitude from Sacramento Democrats when the people speak in a way they don't like. So they're trying to erase that vote. And then, most egregiously, statewide, you see two ballot initiatives just in the last few weeks where millions in one case, nearly a million in the other case, of citizens of California have signed petitions to get measures onto the ballot to push back against what they see as the failings of the Democratic one party rule in California. So, first on taxes, we've talked, if you follow this show closely, you've followed this many times. These arrogant, power crazed Democrats who've just become so authoritarian in their mindset. They did it with this measure called the Taxpayer Protection and Government Accountability Act, which got over 1 million signatures to try and restrain Democrats in Sacramento from raising taxes without limit. So, guess what the Democrats do? Sue to get it off the ballot. And then you have this totally biased California Supreme Court, 6 out of 7 of them appointed by Democrats, doing their bidding and taking it off the ballot. Even as they say that we would normally do this after the election, once people have had a chance to express their views. But this time, because the Democrats really didn't want this to pass, no, they yanked it off the ballot beforehand so the people don't get a chance to vote on it. And now they're doing exactly the same kind of thing with another effort to clear up the mess that the Democrats have made in another really important area with policy, which is crime. So by now, people are very familiar with the nightmare consequences of Proposition 47, dishonestly sold to Californians in 2014, including by Kamala Harris, who was then the state attorney general, as a measure to make communities and schools safer. That was what was billed. It was billed at. In fact, it has been a really key part of the explosion of crime and chaos and disorder and drugs and homelessness on our streets. This is the notorious measure that allows people to steal $950 worth of stuff per day per store. So there's a measure that's got on the ballot. Nearly 1 million people signed it. It's put forward, led by the district attorneys up and down the state of California, going through all the proper constitutionally mandated processes to get it on the ballot. To reform this is very thoughtful reform. It doesn't just overturn it and abolish it. It actually is very well put together. So guess what? Sacramento Democrats say, no, you can't have that just because people want it. Doesn't mean you can have it. So they've been tying themselves in knots trying to get rid of this measure. I mean, it's just unbelievable when you watch what they've been doing over the past few weeks. First of all, they said this is totally inappropriate to deal with this through a ballot initiative. So we're going to have a package of laws that we're going to put through the legislature in order to deal with it. So then they bring forward this package of laws, which are completely pathetic. And as we've discussed on this show, don't do anything to address the problem. But the real purpose of the laws, it turns out, is to try and sabotage the ballot initiative by giving them the chance to rewrite its description and to put in what was described as a poison pill to stop people from voting for it. Even the Democrats didn't swallow that. So they dropped the poison pill stuff. And now, unbelievably, after saying you can't deal with this through an initiative, they're saying, well, our poison pill legislation thing didn't work to stop this initiative that we don't like. So now we're going to do our own initiative, which also won't work, but hopefully it'll confuse the voters enough that the one we really want to stop won't pass. And so this is where they're at. And because they've been doing it in secret at the last minute, they cobbled this together on Sunday night, and they're trying to get it in before the deadline, because there's 72 hours you have to publish bills. They've published a bill to get an initiative on the ballot. I mean, on and on. It's just so unbelievable. They are just absolutely determined to stop the people voting for the change that they want. And these are the people who lecture us about our democracy. You look back at the national level, look at abortion, where the Supreme Court ruled that it should be taken out of the hands of judge, whatever you think about the issue, out of the hands of judges and put back into the hands of the voters to decide at the state level. Democrats are against that. Just now, we're going to talk about it more in the next section of this show. The Chevron ruling, hugely important. It is a ruling from the Supreme Court that takes power away from unelected bureaucrats and puts it back in the hands of elected representatives in the Congress when it comes to federal regulation. And guess what? The Democrats hate it. They're against it. This is terrible. Every single time, it seems, when there's an actual situation where democracy in its true meaning, the people expressing what they want, and then that turning into the outcomes that they real world outcomes through legislation or whatever else it may be, the Democrats turn out to be against it. And so all these lectures about democracy are really to cover up the fact that the Democrats hate democracy. What they really love is their power, unconstrained, to implement their increasingly extremist ideology. So, yeah, democracy dies in the hands of Democrats. The enemies of democracy in America today are the Democrats. The Democratic Party, absurdly misnamed, is now the greatest threat to democracy in America. That's the truth. And it's being revealed at the national level, at the state level, and it's time we woke up and challenged them on it. So let's now talk about the policy implications of the Chevron ruling. It's an incredibly important ruling. And as I was just mentioning, the Democrats have just gone hysterical about it. And actually, some of the dissent in the Supreme Court has been hysterical as well. But actually, what it's doing is constraining the power of unelected bureaucrats. So if you truly believe in democracy, then this is a ruling that you should support. So this all goes back to a case in 1984, Chevron versus Natural Resources Defense Council, and it became known as Chevron deference. What that means is that's the shorthand. And what it meant is that in future, after that previous ruling, if you had legislation that was passed by the Congress that was vague in its language and open to interpretation in different ways, then it would be up to the regulators, the bureaucrats in the administrative state, the deep state, whatever you want to call it. They had wide latitude to turn this into policy if the actual original legislation wasn't prescriptive and specific enough. And what that really did was give enormous power to these bureaucrats to make things up that actually were never intended in the legislation. Because what you see over and over again, and this is why this case was so important, this new case that challenged it, the fisherman's case, was that um, these agencies were going way beyond what was intended by the Congress. And in fact, a lot of the time, the Congress, because they're not doing their job properly, would deliberately write legislation that's vague, um, and open to wide ranges of interpretation, knowing that the bureaucracy would just go and do it, and they wouldn't be held accountable for it because they could just blame the bureaucracy. So it's a way of the Congress abdicating its responsibility to be precise in the way it writes laws. And in particular, given the corruption that we know exists inside Congress, where you have lobby groups and all the rest of it, who is just so in control of the actual process of writing legislation. I mean, we look at these laws that get passed, and every now and again they pop up into the news, and you kind of see the headlines about these laws, but actually they're thousands of pages long often, and what's hidden away in the detail of this legislation, which no one really reads because it's so much of it and it's hard to follow. But the people who really do read it are the lobbyists, who absolutely know what's in the legislation. They help write it. And so it's just been this massive transfer of power from an elected branch of government, the legislature, to an unelected branch that's not even in the Constitution, the bureaucracy, the administrative state. And so you've seen this applied in all sorts of ways, way beyond the intent of the original legislation. You've seen the Obama administration and then the Biden administration, for example, use it to make sweeping environmental rules, banning certain types of power generation and so on, highly, highly aggressive and fundamental policy changes that have never been debated, that were never discussed in the Congress by the elected representatives, that were just implemented by this class of people in the bureaucracy. No one knows who they are. They're not accountable to anyone. And here's the real point. And this is, you may think this is partisan, but it's just the truth. Because so many of these agencies are literally physically located in Washington, D.C., which is one of the most democratic parts of the country, if you look at the votes. like 90% Democrat, something like that. Um, of course, it's going to be the case that the people who work in these bureaucracies are overwhelmingly going to be left leaning. And even if they don't think of themselves as partisan in the sense of supporting Democratic candidates, they definitely have. And I saw this at first hand when I was working um, inside of government back in the UK. They have the kind of mindset of the establishment. So this arrogance of the expert class that they think that they know best. You know, they make these rules. They're going to get better outcomes than if they leave it to individual people or communities or businesses to make decisions. And so that's what's really being expressed in all of this regulation that's just been pouring out of Washington. And the reason it's happened, a really big part of the reason it's happened on the scale that it has, is this ruling from 1984, Chevron deference, because the agencies can just publish all this stuff, the rules and the specifics and the guidelines and whatever, and even if it is miles from what was intended by the original legislators in Congress, it doesn't matter. You can't be challenged because that ruling gave deference in the kind of shorthand, Chevron deference, to the administrators to interpret the law however they wanted and to apply it accordingly. And so that's what's now ended. And that's a huge triumph for democracy, as we were discussing earlier. If you actually believe that it should be the people we elect who make these decisions, then this is a triumph for that. Now, a lot of the people, including in the dissent, have been saying that this is now elevating another branch of government that is in the Constitution, the judicial branch. And they're saying, well, this is outrageous because now the courts will decide. So if you look at the dissent, I mean, it captures this kind of establishment groupthink mindset. So it's Kagan, Lena Kagan, who wrote the dissent. And she's going on about the fact that, well, these agencies and the experts in the agencies, they know the issues inside out. That's the phrase she uses, inside out. And they're the ones that should decide. And then she says, because of this ruling now, it'll be the courts who decide. All of that is false. First of all, maybe they do know the subjects inside out, and that's the problem, that they're insiders, and so they have a particular view. It's not like they're dispassionate, objective people who are kind of assessing this on the basis only of their expertise. No, as we saw in the pandemic, as we see all the time with these regulations, there's a particular groupthink, a world view that is pushed forward through these regulatory agencies and in the administrative state generally. And so it's not like they're just acting objectively and independently. No, they have an opinion and they're pushing it through, even though they're not authorized by the original legislation to do that. So the fact that they know it all inside out, that's the whole problem we're dealing with. And then secondly, to say that now the courts are going to decide. No, the whole point of this is that Congress is going to decide and the courts will adjudicate if there's been some kind of challenge to that. But the decision making has been taken away from, through this ruling, away from the unelected administrative state and put back where it belongs, where the Constitution puts it, which is in the hands of the legislators who we elect. That is how it's supposed to work. That's why this really is a landmark ruling, because it will rein in all this massive regulatory overreach that we've been seeing, that's got worse and worse and worse, and now force the legislators to actually put clearly what they intend when they pass these laws and be held accountable for the consequences. That, by the way, is what we mean by democracy. All right, joining us now for California Corner, the person who I start my day with every day, and that is absolutely literally true, the co-author of Playbook, California Playbook, Politico, Lara Korte. You've if you follow the show, you've seen her here before. It literally is. Every morning I open it up, and there is Playbook, and it tells me what's going on in California.
Thank you so much.
It's fantastic. I totally recommend it to everyone. I literally do recommend it to everyone. But honestly, what is going on? I mean, you've had a hell of a lot to write about. We're taping this on Wednesday afternoon, just before the July the 4th holiday. We were going to have a dramatic late night vote tonight on Governor Newsom's rival ballot initiative to try and compete with the Prop 47 reform. That's been withdrawn last night. He's now in Washington. I mean, what's your sense of this very frenetic, couple of weeks we've seen in Sacramento?
Um, that is a great question. I think the big takeaway here is that Democrats in Sacramento are just super irritated. Like you said, Newsom introduced this rival ballot measure essentially to try and push back against a more conservative ballot measure that would have repealed, I'm sorry, rolled back parts of this Prop 47 measure, which everybody, talks about so much, that increased some drug and theft penalties in 2014. But Newsom has been really pressuring lawmakers to go along with his agenda here, and a couple of them had to take some really hard votes on some of these measures that he wanted in the last couple of, I would say, the last week or so. And then last night, at the very, very last minute, he calls everybody and he says, actually, we're pulling it. And that really caught a lot of people off guard, really frustrated some folks. And so he had to go to Washington today to stand with the president, as he said. But back in Sacramento, folks are still kind of dealing with the fallout of that last minute decision.
And what do you think lies behind it? I've got two sort of big questions, which is first of all, the thing that's really been striking to me as this has unfolded is like, why? Like, why are they? Bear in mind that the reform initiative, which qualified with nearly a million signatures, 900,000 plus, comfortably qualified, and you had Democrat, it was truly bipartisan. Okay, you could say it was led by district attorneys up and down the state, and you could say a majority of them are Republican, etc. But you had the mayor of San Francisco, London Breed, supporting it, the mayor of
Totally.
San Jose, Matt Mahan. Like, why would they? Why is this everyone knows crime is a problem, all the videos, retail theft, etc. Prop 47 itself has become nationally well known, for being at the heart of it. Why on earth would they try so hard to sabotage it through all these different maneuvers over the past few weeks?
Yeah, it's a months long issue that they've been dealing with here. To your point, yeah, this was the ballot measure that's going to be there in November is supported by London Breed and Mahan in San Jose. But I think there was a consensus among Democrats in the legislature that they felt that that measure went too far. Democrats have been trying to address retail theft this entire year. They recognize that the public wants them to do something. They themselves have spoken out against how they don't, they think it's outrageous that we're seeing these big smash and grab burglaries, and they're trying to show the public and they're actually trying to do something about it. But that's been hit with a lot of hurdles, right? So they had at first, they said, we don't need to go to the ballot. Let's do this package of retail theft bills. That didn't really work to get that was a negotiation tactic to get the ballot measure off the ballot, and that didn't work. And so on Sunday, the governor said, well, let's try our own competing ballot measure to try and, if not pressure the DAs to step down, give Californians an alternative measure that isn't as tough as the other measure, because that's another factor here. You still have progressive Democrats
Hmm.
who want to see criminal justice reform, who are really worried about going back to the war on drugs, who are really worried about returning to a period of mass incarceration. And so they floated this ballot measure as, here we're doing something about theft and about, fentanyl, but it's not, as their words, draconian as the other
Right.
measure. But I just don't think that they had the votes to get it through. There was a lot of pressure behind the scenes from different ends of the Democratic spectrum. So I think that it was a really last minute push that may have not, you know, uh, been fully cooked.
So at one point, there was some speculation, um, and I know you reported on it, that the reason originally when they were using the legislative package to try and get it off the ballot voluntarily, get the other side to withdraw it, was
Mhm.
that they didn't want the issue of crime and retail theft and so on to be prominent in the November election on the grounds they were worried it would help Republican turnout, and that would hurt their efforts to to flip some House seats, which is their real priority this year. So it was very much a political argument. Is that? I
Sure.
mean, obviously, do you think that really was part of the story?
Yeah, I think that there's so many things that go into this ballot measure. I think understanding how this dynamic affects races up and down the ballot was another part that they were thinking about. They don't want to put Democrats in these close swing districts in any place where they have to, make tough decisions, right? They don't want to have to force them to make these difficult statements and decide what they back. And so I think
Hmm.
that was a big part of this too. They're worried about, okay, if there's this measure to repeal parts of Prop 47, to roll back parts of Prop 47, it's likely that these vulnerable Democrats are going to be expected to speak on that. And it could
Hmm.
very well be that vulnerable Democrats don't support this measure because there are lots of Democrats who feel like it's too tough. They feel like it's too
Right.
draconian. So that puts them in a really tough spot. And I think that there were certainly some
I see.
conversations amongst Democrats about let's make sure that we don't have to put those vulnerable members in that position. Because I know we've talked about this, the House runs through California. Saving those swing districts is really important to Democrats. And
Yeah.
so that was a factor.
Oh, that's interesting though, because actually you've made sense of the two parts, which is that it is connected to the ideological aspect of it. They really believe it goes too far, and
Some
and so
might.
they don't want to say they don't want to be forced to be against something that may be popular with the majority in their district or something like that.
Right, it puts them between, this is the case in so many votes in the legislature. There are Democrats who come from these purple districts who might not be willing to vote for like a gas tax increase. There are certain
Hmm.
things that just don't play well with your constituents, even if the rest of the caucus and maybe even the member themselves, leans towards the more progressive ideology. That's not to say that the Democrats in, swing districts are trying to mislead voters or anything like that. They may very well feel like that is an appropriate measure. But again, it's such a polarizing issue that I think they want to, not have to put those members
Yeah.
in that position.
I think that all makes total sense. Now let's turn to what happened just now. And I
Mhm.
was interested in the commentary. I've seen, you shared some of that. I can't believe it was. I'm just rushing around to keep up with everything today. Whether it was your analysis or you were reporting someone else's analysis, maybe both. That actually it really does feel as if Gavin Newsom is very distracted and has been distracted and is really focused on the national politics right now.
Yeah, listen, I will caveat this and say that Newsom and his people will say that he is focused on California issues, that he's
Hmm.
been very engaged on this front. And that's true. I know he's been having meetings and talking with a lot of folks about this. But the decision to pull the ballot measure came down about an hour and a half after Newsom announced he was going to Washington today to stand with the president. And, I've heard quietly around the Capitol for well over a year now, lawmakers view his national ambitions a little bit cynically. There is a kind of like tongue in cheek attitude about, well, Newsom's always, keeping an eye to other stuff in other states. And so I think the fact that he was kind of pushing them so hard on this issue and then, dropped it and left the state immediately, a lot of lawmakers felt really frustrated by that. They felt that
Hmm.
it was, showed clearly where his priorities are at. And I just don't think, I think it's a matter of speculation as to whether he, was distracted by what's going on with Biden versus, paying attention to stuff here at home. But it certainly doesn't look good and it doesn't feel good for legislators who have been really working long hours trying to help Newsom come through on this agenda.
Hmm. Interesting. And then, I mean, how does it? Obviously, it's a very kind of fluid and dramatic situation unfolding with Biden himself, and of course,
Mhm.
we have to note that the two leading contenders to replace to step in. It should Biden say I'm not running again, which is speculation. I mean, it changes every day, but as of today, Wednesday, July the 3rd, feels like it's moving more in that direction. Some of the reporting from the New York Times and others suggest that, but we don't know. But it does feel like Kamala Harris, Gavin Newsom, two very, very big figures in California politics, are right there, and it's almost like one or the other. It feels like. How is that playing out in Sacramento? What do you hear on that front?
Man, Gretchen Whitmer and JB Pritzker might feel a little bit hurt that you left them out of the
I know.
conversation, but no, I think this is a fair, conversation. Um, yeah, I think in Sacramento, again, it is the same kind of cynicism about, well, Newsom is just interested in the national ambitions here. the presence of Kamala Harris, and like you said, there are polls recently showing that amongst the potential Biden, replacements, she would perhaps poll best by some measures against Donald Trump. I think it creates an interesting conundrum here. Again, Gavin Newsom has said he doesn't want to run for president. He's standing behind Joe Biden. He has been unflagging in that message. But if he were to someday run for president in any capacity, I think the Kamala Harris factor is really important. He has said publicly that he thinks she should be the next president after Biden, and so you gotta stick to that promise, or at least he'll be expected to stick to that promise. But I think that there's going to be an expectation that he defer to Kamala Harris, just
Really?
because of those comments. I would think so. I think that he's shown deference to her in the past. And I think he's been really trying to be consistent about supporting Biden, about supporting Kamala Harris. I can't imagine that. I feel like it would take some pretty extenuating circumstances for him to try and leapfrog her or, slight her in some way, if that makes
Or even
sense.
running, I mean, I mean, there's 2 scenarios. It's really interesting. That is a different take from the national, commentary on this, but you know it better. I mean, you're here. Um, the
I like to think so.
Yeah, no, and that's why it's so interesting to get to see your perspective. I mean, if there's 2 scenarios, I think. I mean, there's probably more, but the ones that are really out there are, one, again, it's all speculation. He
Mhm,
may just want to soldier on. Um, but if he chooses not to, there's really 2 scenarios. One is that he kind of effectively anoints Kamala Harris and said, I want my delegates at the convention or whatever to vote for Kamala, to support the vice president. And there's
mhm,
another one where it's more of a free for all. It said, I free my delegates to choose the best person. In the
mhm.
event that there's an open convention and it's contested, do you think that Gavin wouldn't run against her? That he would actually say, no, I'm supporting her?
I don't think he would run against her, and again, that's just my
Wow.
speculation. Um, because again, even if it's a free for all, if it's an open convention, all these people exist in the same circles, right?
Yeah.
Like if Newsom were to run against her, it would mean potentially running against really powerful establishment forces and sliding people who had helped him get to where he is. And so I think that if that scenario were to happen, and I'm not saying that it's going to, Biden still wants to stay in, um, I can't imagine that there wouldn't be some kind of table setting
Hmm.
or, understanding behind the scenes. I cannot imagine there would be, I think it would, again, really extenuating circumstances would have to be in place for Newsom to directly challenge Kamala Harris in that context.
Incredibly interesting. That is not what you hear if you watch, CNN or whatever these days.
This is just from talking, with folks in the business and in his circles around him. I think that there is it's not politically savvy, I think, to try and challenge
Right,
her at the end of
right.
the day. Yeah.
No, it makes sense. What you're saying makes sense. And I mean, do they still have the same consultant, as it were? Is it still the same guy running their campaigns, or is that? I know that was the case.
I believe that was the case with her presidential run. It was the Bear Star Partners, but believe mm, I want to say she's not with them anymore. I'm not sure who her consultants are now, but the Bear Star group is still running Gavin Newsom's campaign. So they did at one
And so,
point share the same consultants.
it's so interesting. And then, so what does he do? I mean, of all days, today he announced a new podcast that is
Yeah,
not
you
even
have a
about.
rival there, Steve. Are you ready?
I know. So what is that? It looks like it's going to be less. It was called Politicking, I think. But what I mean,
Politicking.
politicking.
Politicking?
I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, very good. So what is the idea? Is that he's got another 2 years as governor. I don't know. What's the theory? Do you think?
That is a great question. It's with one of his longtime friends, and his name is escaping me now, but I don't know, other people we've seen other like political podcasts like your own, like the All In podcast, like Pod
Hmm.
Save America. You have these politicians, these big names who I think get some enjoyment and some more clout out of coming online and sharing their opinion and speaking kind of freely. So
Hmm.
I was as shocked as anybody to see that this morning, and to be honest, I haven't fully processed it. I've been dealing more with the
I
fallout of
know.
his decision last night, but it certainly was odd. I will say that my mom texted me. She's a conservative voter from Kansas. She texted me and she said, "Gavin Newsom looks like a model in that photo." So
I think that
he
was
won
the
the
thing that was
Midwestern
so
Moms.
I know it was the thing that was so incongruous about it was the cover, the cover shot, whatever you call it, on a day when there's so much serious news out there. It just felt really incongruous, didn't it?
It really did, and I was thinking about that again this morning as I was, making my coffee. I thought that's just poor timing, just like unfortunate timing, I think. I'm sure these types of things are planned way in advance and, it's being put out by iHeartMedia and there's
Yeah,
all these other people involved. I'm sure it wasn't,
exactly.
his decision to hit the publish button today, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's very incongruous. That's a good word.
Can I ask you, I mean, I don't want to go on all day about it, but it is just so fascinating.
Sure.
Going back to the convention, I meant to ask you about the California delegation because it's the biggest delegation, and if you do have a convention and there are people voting, um,
Mhm.
the California delegation will have a really big impact because there's just more of them.
Sure, I suppose so. Are you thinking that maybe they would all go for Gavin Newsom in that
Well, I'm
context?
asking, like who? I mean, do you know who these people? I mean, they're all kind of, I guess they're donors, apparatchiks, whatever. Like, if there was, how would they
Yeah.
go? How would they vote?
Well, I will say I've talked to some delegates this week and they're all still pledged for Biden. We've been
Right.
trying to talk with delegates around the country to see, is there any consternation? Are people worried about, Biden's ability to continue? Would you consider voting for an open convention? Or, how would you handle an open convention? Um, yeah, California has a huge delegation. It's mostly, I will say, it's everybody from like local Democratic staffers to like Democratic members of city council. It's a lot of folks who are kind of the foot soldiers
Hmm.
of the Democratic Party doing these things. Um, I don't know. It's hard to say how they would handle an open convention. I think a lot of them are just trying right now to act like that possibility doesn't exist. To just say we're
Yeah.
sticking with Biden and going forward.
I do get the feeling just looking at it, this is just my commentary on it, just observing, and also with one other thing I've always thought. My observation is when you have someone like Jim Clyburn, pretty clearly saying, no, we got to go with Kamala Harris. He's
Hmm.
so influential in the party, so revered. I would have thought that's interesting. It feels like we're moving towards, a clear decision to transfer to Kamala Harris rather than have it, be open. The second thing I've always thought is for Joe Biden personally, like one way, if you like, of salvaging some, something positive from all of this, which has been a terrible week for him, is the idea that he is the person who in some senses anointed the first female president, first president of color, and sorry, black woman, I should say, and therefore there's something positive about that would appeal to him and would be a kind of positive way of taking what it must be an absolutely devastating personal decision.
Sorry, he's trying to use that idea that he is the anointing one of a
Yeah,
black
I
woman
think it might
president.
appeal to him as a reason to not just say, "I'm out,
Mm,
over to you," but say, "I'm out, please make sure that
I see
Kamala
what you're saying.
gets in."
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think you could certainly try and spin it that way if that were to be the decision. Look, as far as all the kind of media we're seeing in the headlines about, this aide said Biden's maybe considering this thing. I don't want to discount any of the good reporting by all my colleagues in the media, but I think because we have this specter that it could happen, people are so hungry for any
Yes,
morsel that might be the truth, right? And
right,
so
right.
we're getting all these like kind of secondhand, third hand, oh, maybe he will, tidbits, but until he actually does it, I just don't think it's real.
Mm,
That's my personal, I'm going to wait until it's actually final because everybody right now wants to be part of this conversation.
I know.
Everybody wants to say they know what's going to happen. Nobody does. Joe
It's
Biden knows.
absolutely right. Exactly. All right. Last question to you. Let's go bring it back to California. Are we going to calm down a little bit for the next few weeks? So it's doing so
Oh,
crazy. You've had all the ballot initiative stuff. You've had the budget, all these bills. I mean, it's such a crazy time. Is it now calming down a bit? What do we have coming up in the next few weeks?
well, tonight at midnight they go on summer recess. The legislature does until oh gosh, we get back in the first week of August, I believe, and then we've got about another month of trying to get some bills passed. I won't bore you with the kind of interesting measures I'm watching in the legislature. We have some retail theft stuff. I'm following artificial intelligence,
Hmm.
but then after summer ends, and I think after. after the end of August, that's when campaigning is really going to kick up in earnest.
Hmm.
I think you can expect to see there's some vulnerable Democrats in the legislature, but really the big focus in California, I think, is going to be on those 5 House seats that
Yeah.
could potentially be flipped. That's just such a big deal. I think you're going to see money from all levels of government funnel towards those House races. So that's where I plan to funnel my attention
Yeah.
to as well.
So they've got a few weeks off, so that's at least a bit of a
Yeah.
pause in terms of okay, very good. Can you
Yeah.
just remind me what I said? It was the last question, but like, you were very the five. How that's Valadeo, David Valadeo in the Central Valley, John Duarte in the Central Valley, Republican incumbents who won by a tiny amount. Who are the other
Sure.
ones that they're really targeted that the Democrats think that they can get?
Yeah, okay, I say 5, and it could be more than that. I think there's lots that you could look to. We're also you name the 2 Central Valley ones, Katie Porter's seat is
Oh
very
yes,
much,
Stockport. Yeah.
that's a possibility. You have Dave Menn and Scott Baugh running in that seat. Also, Ken Calvert is facing
Hmm.
another challenge from Will Rollins in Palm Springs. I'm trying to think of the other ones. There's some Orange County seats. You have Young Kim and Michelle Steele always kind of being targeted. Orange County is a purple area, and so
Hmm.
that's always naturally going to be one where both parties push really hard. I know that I'm forgetting one, and I cannot remember.
I mean, they all
Oh,
go on about Mike
Mike
Garcia, but
Garcia. Yeah.
he keeps winning by bigger and bigger margins.
He does. It's one of the ones that's on my list of swing seats. And forgive me, I'm not the most up to date on where the polls are at in
Yeah.
each of those districts. I've been a little distracted, but yeah, there's
Yeah,
some
anything
important
going
ones.
on? Exactly. All
Yeah.
right, let's leave it there. I mean, I just think that it's just so much. The idea of a bit of a breather from all these shenanigans in Sacramento feels very, very welcome. So,
Yeah.
but playbook will still be there every day, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? When the legislature calms down, that's when we need more tips to write about things. So
Okay.
please send us in your your interesting thoughts and your interesting tips. We're looking for stories.
Fantastic, Laura. Thank you so much for you joined us on short notice today, and we really appreciate it. Thank you.
No, thanks for having me. This was great.
All right, joining us now for Candidate Corner is Suzette Valladares, who is running for state senate in California. Suzette is fantastic. We were at an event together um, just last week, and we're new friends. And I'm very, very proud to introduce her to all of you. Suzette, how are you doing? Tell us a little bit about yourself and your district and why this race is so important.
Well, Steve, first of all, thank you so much for having me on your show today and for being a part of my event the other day. It was a phenomenal event. My name is Suzette Martinez Valladares, and I am a candidate, former Assemblywoman, and candidate for State Senate in California Senate District 23. And, a little bit about myself. My great grandparents came to California in 1911 and 1917. They worked in the fields. My grandmother worked in the fields with Cesar Chavez, which is, a legend in the Central Valley. My parents are high school sweethearts, and met in high school. My dad never graduated high school, but built his first engine for a '57 Chevy when he was 15 years old. So had that entrepreneurial spirit. And married my mom, who was a volunteer in my classroom, and really my family, my have really set my foundation of values, which have been California values, right? They came here for the California dream. And 3 generations later, their daughter would be the first Latina elected, Republican Latina elected to the state assembly. And unfortunately, my family's California dream has become a nightmare. The state they came to for opportunity is crushing the middle class, is crushing hardworking Californians and Americans. And it is what prompted me and my husband and my now 7-year-old daughter. She was 2 when we first started campaigning,
Right.
but my now 7-year-old daughter, it was our call to public service. We will not leave California. But if we stay, we stay and we fight. So I've spent the majority of my life serving our community in the nonprofit sector here in my district is Santa Clarita, the Antelope Valley, as well as Victor Valley in California. And, super exciting time for me and frustrating time to be a Californian, but that's a little bit of my story.
Fantastic. Well, let's get just talk about the district a bit because it's very interesting. So I was there. We were in Lancaster, and it's a very interesting part of the state. So it's just, I guess you'd say, what northeast of Los Angeles, if people can sort of picture that. Um, it's got such an interesting. First of all, by the way, for those who aren't following these races closely, these state senate districts, they're big, right? You represent a lot of people. It's about 1 million people, is that right?
Yes, 950,000 people.
Tell us a little bit about the, because you've got a lot of interesting industry there and great companies, and it's just very and so tell us a bit about the district and the kind of demographics of it, and who you're seeking to represent.
Yeah. So for those of you who aren't familiar with every inch of California, if you've been to Six Flags Magic Mountain, that's where my district starts. And I actually worked at Magic Mountain for 8 years. It's like a rite of passage in our area. It was my first job. So it starts at in Santa Clarita, Six Flags Mountain area. We head north to the Antelope Valley, so home of the California Poppy Reserve. Thank you for making the trek up here. I know it is a long but gorgeous commute. I think from we go into Adelanto, Victorville, so the high desert, Mojave Desert area. And so if you are driving from the very southern western part of my district to the northeastern part of my district, it's about 100 miles. So geographically, it is a massive district. It's a working class district. In the Santa Clarita area, the entertainment industry is huge, which has really been crippled. And from my perspective, from bad and a lack of competitive policy, it coming out of Sacramento. Tourism, huge, obviously, Six Flags Magic Mountain, huge aerospace and defense industries. We have Edwards just north of me, right outside of my district. We're home of the B-2 bomber here in the Antelope Valley. We have a new AV Alta soccer team, professional soccer team coming here. This is a working class district, a growing community here in the 23rd Senate District. And again, it's the working class people in California that are feeling the failed policies of Gavin Newsom.
So that's exactly what I wanted to talk with you about, and in particular with your Latino background, because it seems to me that when people say, um, obviously you're running as a Republican, but people say, well, and it varies. You're running in the legislature, right? So the different districts have different characteristics, and we can get into the politics of your district in a second. But broadly, when people say statewide, Republicans can't win because it's such a democratic state and so on. The two things I always point out: first of all, it's a much more Republican state than people think. The average share of the vote for Republicans in the last 20 years, since the Republicans last won a statewide election in 2006, is 41.7%, which is, it's not a majority, but it's a lot bigger than most people think. And then you ask yourself, well, how are you going to, would a Republican be able to get to that magic 50% number and win statewide? And my answer is yes, particularly by focusing on what you've just talked about, the working class, the people who've been hammered the most by these far left policies. And in particular, now that Latinos are the largest group in California, 40% of our population, feels to me like that intersection of working class Latinos, I think, is a real opportunity for the GOP if we get it right.
Absolutely. I am a lifelong Republican. As I mentioned, my dad was a small business owner. I understand the value of hard work and, the fruits of what you plant. That's what my, family background, the foundation that I've had is because of that. But I also know that I'm seeing, obviously I'm Latina. I have Latino family members and friends here in Southern California. And I have personally seen a huge shift and their mentality towards the Republican Party in California, specifically because the Democrats have been in power in California for 3 decades. You're absolutely right. Republicans don't hold a statewide office. They have super majorities in the state Senate and the state assembly. There are 40 senators in California's state Senate. Only 8 of us are Republican. And when I get there, I'll be 8 as well. I'm replacing somebody who is terming out. And they're realizing that you've given this party absolute power and have come to the realization that not only does absolute power corrupt, but it doesn't produce. And they're failing on every single issue. And I think that you're absolutely right. We're seeing a shift here in California. It may not be the tidal wave we want it to be because we didn't get here overnight. We're not going to get out of this overnight. But in my district, Republicans have registered over 3,000 new Republican voters, and the Democrats have lost over 1,000. Those are some serious shifts. They took me out, Steve, when I was elected to the state assembly. My district was a district that Biden carried by about 6 points. When my
Is
after
that when you
redistricting,
were elected in 2020 to the assembly?
I was elected in 2020, and they hate the Democrats hate who I am, right? I blow up their narrative. Young, well, I'll say I'm young. I'm a mom.
I'll
I'm
give you
Latina.
young
I'm
Suzette.
Republican. Yes, I'll take it. I'll take it. I'm Republican, and I blow up their narrative of who they tell people Republicans are in the state of California. So they put that target on my back. They redrew my district to a district that Biden won by 16.3. Now, what was phenomenal, Steve, is that we worked our district. We talked about the issues. We addressed the issues of affordability, of wildfires, of lack of insurance, of competition in the insurance market. We talked about issues of crime and homelessness and presented real solutions to these crises. And I lost ultimately by 522 votes. But that
Wow.
meant that I had a lot of crossover from Democrats and independents who are seeking new leadership.
So what is that, and how, what, just tell me in terms of the issues and the things that you campaign on and the conversations you're having in your community, particularly with this through this lens of the working class Latino vote, which I think is very, very interesting for the future of California. What are the specifics? So you say affordability, but within that, what are the things that really resonate when you say to people why they should switch from Democrat to Republican or from not voting to Republican?
Yeah, I would say one of the biggest issues of affordability that my community is facing is energy and gas prices. So we're a sprawl district, right? We have some of the last affordable housing in LA County, and it's still expensive. Don't get me wrong, but we have a lot of commuters that have moved to here for the dream of homeownership, but also have to commute down to LA or from Victorville down to Fontana, and they're paying exorbitant amounts of money on gas. And as a matter of fact, just yesterday, the state of California raised the gas tax again. We're now paying 60 cents per gallon to the state of California. And I think it's over $1.50 in taxes, in general. Well, you know what? My community is taking the brunt of that. The gas tax is a regressive tax that impacts my community most. That's what they're frustrated about. They're frustrated about the high cost of air conditioning and heating, right? We're in the desert. It gets really cold in the winter. It snows up here and it gets really hot in the summer. The lack of affordable housing. One of the things I proposed when I was in the state assembly is let's adjust the renter's tax credit that has not been adjusted, I think, since before I was born, from $500 to $2,500, right? These are basic things that we can do to put more money back in the pockets of hardworking people of my district. And these are the issues I'm most concerned about. On top of crime. And let me just tell you, if you're Latino, you grew up with the chancla, and that means accountability, right? And that's not what we have in California.
I want to get to crime in a second. Just before we leave affordability, renters tax credit. That's a really interesting, specific um, proposal there. What could just explain that a little bit more for those who don't understand that, who may not rent themselves or who don't know how that works.
Yeah, so first of all, I am a huge proponent of the American dream of buying a home. And I think that, especially for Latino families, that is one of the number one top ways in terms of creating economic upward mobility for Latinos, right? And generational wealth is owning a home, passing it on to your kids, right? I am a huge advocate for that. But the reality is, some people are not at that point in their lives. So we have renters, right? And California has always been a homeowner's market. Unfortunately, because of the policies coming out of Sacramento, we're moving into a renter's market, right? Because people can't afford to buy a home. Well, if you can't afford to buy a home, you should still you're still contributing to the housing market. And to some owner, some business, currently you can write off about $500, but that hasn't been adjusted for inflation in over 40 years. So pretty simple. Let's adjust that for inflation, which would be about between two and $2,500,
So would every renter get
$2,500.
that?
Yeah, absolutely. Every renter does get it now.
That's such a great, simple proposal. Are you
I got lots of great ones.
Yeah, keep going. Okay, I mean, but this is what I think. Like it's very simple, practical things that for most people don't follow politics that closely, and they're not obsessing about it. It's just okay. What are you, what are you going to do that helps me directly? I feel like that's a simple one that people can really understand.
Yeah, I mean, there's other things that we need to do around affordability. I love the latest and greatest idea of eliminating taxes from tips, right? Man, talk about wanting to directly impact the working class. I was a server and a bartender for 5 years in my younger years when I was getting through college. That would have been huge for me. I think it's, a big hand up for people now. I would be supportive of something like that. Or, let's allow people to deduct their medical expenses, right? The Democrats like to pay lip service in saying that they want universal access to healthcare, or they want this, government run, which I'm completely, against, because we get things that, government doesn't run anything well. But let's allow people to, if it's a human right and a basic right, then why not allow people to deduct the expenses they're paying annually, right? There's so many things we
From
can
their
do.
taxes, you mean?
From their taxes, correct. Annually, right? So you're paying, premiums, whatever it is that you're paying out of pocket for your healthcare. Why aren't you able to deduct that at the end of the year, right? It's simple things like that we can do in the state of California that would really hit home um, for working class Californians.
But it's interesting, isn't it? Because you look at what's coming out of Sacramento. It's the opposite. Actually, it's the opposite of. And I say this the whole time. Like we got to be, especially if we, thinking about it as just someone who wants to see Republican candidates elected, So I say we in the sense of the Republican Party, we have to be positive and practical. That's what I talk about the whole time. Like it's not ideological. That's the problem in California. It's got so ideological. So all these things come out of Sacramento, and you genuinely can't understand. Like, why would someone do that? It doesn't make any sense. It just makes life
Right.
worse for people. It's because they've got so obsessed with their own kind of far left extremist ideology.
Yeah, and I feel like there's this major gaslighting going on by the Democratic Party, right? Because they're so tied to their ideology and their policies that they refuse to look at the actual outcomes that are being produced by their policies, right? And I mean, pick an issue. I talk about the California dream becoming the California nightmare. That's a sad reality for many families. But California's brand is crisis. They have total control to change this. Did you know that in Sacramento, the word tax cut is a dirty word? They might take a look at your bill that's a tax credit, but you say tax cut, that's a dirty word to them, right? They just don't get it. And the vast majority of legislators serving in the state legislature have never ran a business,
Yes,
have
exactly.
never worked in corporate America, they don't understand the responsibility of having employees, right? They don't understand that, I'm a small business owner myself. You love your employees, right? You want people to excel and to thrive. You want their families to thrive. Their families become an extended part of your family. They don't get it. And they're gaslighting the California
Yes.
people, and we're waking up.
There was a really revealing thing the other week I saw on social media. It's not a California thing. I believe it was in Philadelphia. I'm not sure. It was with Biden was on some kind of campaign visit and stopping by with someone and asked how's it going. It was like black owned organization. I can't remember what it was. And oh, we're doing really well. We've done really well with grants this year. And I thought that was so revealing. It's like that's their world, right? Isn't it? Of getting grants from it's the whole world of and that, non-profits play a really important role in our society. So I'm not decrying that in any way. And we all support charities that do an amazing job. So that's all great. But we've got to create the wealth to pay for all this somehow. And that's businesses that do that. Small businesses, medium-sized, large business. We try to support all businesses, help them to grow. And it feels like the Democratic Party now really comes from that, the in broad terms, the non-profit sector. It's campaigners and activists and organizers and all the rest of it. And so that's their mentality. And so that's why it's okay to keep, piling burdens on business and making everything, in their view, because they truly, it's not their constituency.
Right. And you know what? They manipulate the system. Well, first of all, they want bigger government. They have bigger government. We see that here in the state of California. They want government to take care of everything for you. They don't want to actually empower people and business. I mean, just look at their policies, right? It does absolutely the opposite. You know, California was once a place where not only did you have a thriving housing market, you had thriving education and higher education. You had thriving, businesses. Think about, some of the our, keystone businesses here, and from Apple to, Lucky to, we have other Fortune 500 companies in my district that are now leaving the state of California because it doesn't pencil out. We're not competitive. Hollywood. The Hollywood industry is so incredibly vital to the economic engine in my community. Yet that is leaving because we're no longer competitive. And until we can understand that this is about good policy that
Yeah.
supports business and not pitting workers against business, that's a falsehood. You can support business and support workers, and I think Republicans are going to be taking back seats. There's going to be a little bit of a red wave we're excited for here in November, and the pendulum is starting to swing.
Yeah, we have. I mean, the Hollywood thing is very interesting because I'm assuming from what you're saying, in particular when you talk about the working class aspect and the commutes and so on, you're really talking about a lot of the people who work in on the what I think people describe as the craft side of making things. The people who kind of build the sets and the engineers and the lighting, whatever. So we're not talking about George Clooney here or whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and so and that is leaving to other state. Tell us about that because I think it's a really important economic thing that it's not talked about enough. One of our iconic industries actually leaving the state.
Yeah, we call it the below the line workforce. So, right. So not the people that are on front of the screen. And you're right. In my district, this is where they live, right? They have bought homes. We have a growing Hollywood production industry. So sound stages, post-production, everything that it takes to produce a film, a TV show, the actual filming happens in my district. However, what's happening is when you don't have affordable housing, unfortunately, the strikes over the past couple of years have really bitten into a once exploding industry. The COVID restrictions, there's been a plethora of policies and that make it harder to do business in the state of California for the entertainment industry. And so other states like Georgia and even other countries have figured out, hey, let's provide massive tax credits. Let's make sure there's affordable housing, to recruit and entice Hollywood production to come to our state. Now they've done that, and now they've also taken our workforce because if are making $200,000 building, working on lighting for a film in California, you're struggling. I know that sounds insane, but you're struggling. But if you're making $200,000 as working on lighting and production in Atlanta, you're doing really well, right? That's a big thing, and we've started to see a huge shift in Hollywood production because of things like that.
Just quickly, what would you, if you had a kind of wish list to keep the entertainment industry located in California and to entice some of it back, what would you be looking at?
Yeah, again, one of the things we need to increase the film tax credit. We need to look at really some of these regulations that make it really hard for Hollywood production to stay here, and it's an all encompassing lack of competitiveness because come back to it, you need the housing, right? Like you need to be able to recruit people. They want to live in the communities that they're working in, right? We need to invest in education and particularly the trades when it comes to uh, having a workforce for the Hollywood industry. That's dwindling as well. So it's not just, there's not like, a linchpin for spurring this. It's a bunch of things that we need to do, but we need somebody that understands that it is comprehensive in order to address it.
And then let's talk about the final issue that we've got time for today. And you mentioned it earlier, and I'm sure that's part of the story as well, which is that with crime and safety and that sense of, is this a place where I want to raise my family? That plays a part in these decisions to leave the state as well. What are you hearing in the community about that, and what do you see looking forward?
Yeah. I grew up in a California that I remember once my parents bought a house, we lived in a bad area in apartments, and they worked really hard to buy a house, and I lived on a great street, and I could ride my bike until, the street lights came on and my mom was yelling at me, Suzette, get in the house. Right. That isn't a reality for my daughter anymore. And, it doesn't seem to matter where you go, that you have to keep up your guard. And it's felt like that for quite a long time in California. When you go to the grocery store, you're holding your kid's hand extra tight, or you're going to the Santa Monica Pier, which I won't go to anymore. It's just too dangerous. We felt that way for a while, but it's happening. So there's not a person that I know that hasn't been touched by crime, whether it is, being a victim of assault, whether it is having your catalytic converter cut from under your car while you're asleep in your house at night, whether it's the smash and grabs that you see, happening in person or in your community at the store that you shop at, right? Or it's just walking down the street and seeing, the mentally ill and drug addicted, you know, homeless individuals who are assaulting people, right? This is a reality that we live in here in California. And it's coupled by a DA, George Gascon, that refuses to hold criminals accountable, and by a legislature that continues to decriminalize everything. One of the saddest and most heartbreaking moments for me when I served in the state assembly, Senator Scott Wiener had a bill. I think it was SB 357, I think was the bill number, and essentially legalized prostitution. It said that law enforcement could no longer stop an individual for loitering with the intent to commit prostitution. What was most heartbreaking for me when that bill passed, I was a big fat no on that. And my soul just kind of sunk when that passed. Because I have friends that are in law enforcement, that are detectives for victims of sexual assault and for human trafficking. And they use that, law enforcement use that as a tool to end the cycle of abuse and human trafficking. And they took that tool away from law enforcement, which makes our girls less safe. And I knew that, and I said that. And that was my argument. Don't pass this bill because you're going to hurt girls. You're going to hurt women. And sure enough, since that bill has passed, we have seen an explosion in human trafficking. And that's just another example of how the legislature has failed us.
And it's another example of the ideology totally knocking out common sense and practicality. I mean, all this crime stuff that they're pushing, it's all driven by this far left extremism on criminal justice reform, which, you could say came from a good place, years ago. Then, you could make the case that there were too many people in jail for sentences for crimes that may have been better addressed in other ways. But it's gone like anything. When you push it to the extreme, it breaks, and that's what we've got. And then they end up in this ridiculous position where basically they don't want anyone in jail for anything. And they don't want to hold anyone accountable for any crime because they've adopted this mindset, this ideological mindset that it's all racist or whatever. I mean, the whole thing, anyway, all I want to say on a more positive note is it's very, very refreshing to hear you speak about the issues in such a common sense and practical way. Just a couple of things to close us out. First of all, just the politics of your district. How's it looking? You mentioned that they redistricted your previous district, make it very Democrat leaning. How is this one?
Yeah, so this is a purple district. This is going to be a fight. It's considered the top protect for Republicans because it's currently held by a Republican. But the Democrats have a 9-point voter registration advantage over me in this seat. And the Democrats, again, they want to take me out. I blow up their narrative. I'm the future of Republicans in the state of California. I'm a common sense person who understands the issues of her community. They want to take me out. They're going to throw a lot of money at this seat. It is winnable. Republicans have to turn out. Every Republican has to turn out. So I look at 3 things that I could use your help with. Votes. If you live in my district, Santa Clarita, high desert area, get out and vote. I know a lot of people feel disenfranchised and like their vote doesn't matter. Your vote matters. Volunteer, whether it's in my race or any race in your community, you have to get out and get other people to vote for common sense and talk to those JFK Democrats who no longer have a party, right? That's a reality for us as Republicans. We can win on the issues. And then vault. which is I need money. If you can contribute to my campaign or to any other candidates, you can visit my website at SuzetteValladares.com to support me. But this is going to be a tough race, and I can't do it without help, which is why I'm so thankful for your help, Steve.
Of course. And then I just want to end with the lovely story you told about your daughter when we were at the event last week, about how she feels about you doing this. Tell that story.
Yeah. So when I was in the state assembly, I'd have to leave, 3 nights out of the week. And one day I came home and she was coloring on the coffee table and she looks up at me and says, Mom, when I grow up, I'm going to save the world so that you don't have to go to Sacramento anymore. And it just, it killed me because this little girl misses her mama when she's gone, but she thinks I'm saving the world. So, she gave me some pretty powerful directives in that statement, and I'm out there to save her world.
Fantastic. We love it. Thank you, Suzette. You're the best. SuzetteValladares.com. We'll make sure we put that out in all our information. Good luck to you, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Steve.
So here is something I'd like to get off my chest this week: how we run elections in this country and how they run elections in other countries. So as those of you who follow me by now know, I have a very strong view on how we should be doing elections. Vote on one day, count on one day, get the results on one day. Here in America, I've advocated making polling day a national holiday so everyone can get to the polls and do it. It's a great act of civic participation. We should celebrate it. That's how I think we should do it. And when I say that, I say, well, look, that's how it's done in other countries. Like, why are we so incapable of doing it? We just had another example. So France just had their elections, first round of their parliamentary elections across the country. That's how they did it, right? They voted on one day, they counted on one day, and they got the results late in the day. Everyone trusts the system. There's no shenanigans. No one's questioning the results. None of this ridiculous complexity that we've introduced here in America when it comes to voting. I just want to describe to you how they actually do it. This is from an article in the Associated Press. Quote, voters make their choices in a booth with the curtains closed, then they place their ballot in an envelope that is then put into a transparent ballot box. No machines, just a pen and paper, pencil and paper, whatever. I had never heard of voting machines until I came to America. Why do we need voting machines? Like, the whole thing seems ridiculous to me. So then, reading again from this AP story, quote, they must show photo identification and sign a document next to their name to complete the process. In France, everyone has to do that. Quote, mail-in voting was banned in 1975 amid fears of potential fraud. People who can't go to the polls for various reasons can authorize someone else to vote for them. To do so, a voter must fill out a form ahead of time and bring it to a police station. Up to 7% of people voted by proxy in the last presidential election in France. French people living abroad vote in embassies or consulates. Local authorities can organize vans or buses to pick up older people from nursing homes to bring them to voting stations, and prisons set up voting stations inside their facilities. Volunteers count the ballots one by hand. Officials then use state-run software to register and report results. But legally, only the paper counts. If a result is challenged, the paper ballots are recounted manually. I mean, that's France, right? That's what they do. I asked the question on X, like, why can't we do that here? Most people seem to agree, but then you get these ridiculous responses, which I'll just take on a couple of them. Oh, it's a bit, we're 5 times as big. So what? Like, our elections are organized locally. It's not about the fact that and so are theirs. You just do it locally. It's not, you can have 5 times as many people as we have in America, and you could still do that system. The number of people doesn't matter. They talk about time zones. Oh, they don't have all the time zones we do. Well, of course. But so what's the difference? Or you just keep it open a bit later to catch up with the time zones. It doesn't have anything to do with the actual process. Like, why would the fact that you have a 3-hour, okay, include Hawaii and Alaska and whatever, 5-hour time difference across the country mean that you need 1 month of early voting? Like, what? None of it makes sense. There's actually no good reason why we can't do what France and most other countries do. You're going to see it this week again in the British elections. People will go into their polling places and they're going to literally mark a piece of paper and put it in a box, and then volunteers are going to count it. I know my mother was one of those volunteers. So, and it's all transparent, and they're done. The votes are brought back into it could be a gym or a kind of civic center or wherever, and there's long tables, rows of tables, and they're the people diligently counting and making little piles, and up and down behind the rows of counters, representatives from the for the candidates and the parties, so they can scrutinize and make sure everything's on the up and up, and it's all on camera, so people can watch what's going on. It's all in the open, all done through paper ballots, all marked on one day, on polling day, counted on one day, and the results reported in one day. I mean, in England, we're going to see it again. I mean, I'm taping this on Tuesday morning. The election's on Thursday. If you watch it, with our time difference here in America, you'll be able to see the results. There's one district, they call them constituencies in England. There's always a contest, like who can who can count and report their results the quickest. As I recall, it was a place in the north of England called Sunderland, and they used to pride themselves on winning the contest to get the results quickest. And I think they did it like in 55 minutes or something, count all the votes. And so it's just ridiculous to say that we can't do that here. No, it's all political. The reason that they've made it so complicated is for partisan advantage. And that's why now, almost uniquely, we here in this country, in America, have this massive debate about the integrity of our elections and people questioning them, and it's become so toxic in our politics or whatever. Why? Because we've made it so complicated. We've introduced so many elements that can give rise either to legitimate questions about how elections are caused or to conspiracy theories. The point is, whatever your perspective, wherever you're coming from politically, you should want people to have faith and confidence in our elections. That is vital for the health of our society. Most other places in the world do have that faith and confidence in their system of elections. And guess what they all have in common? They do it the old-fashioned way, the way that France just did it, the way the UK is just about to do it. Why can't we do it here? There's no good reason, and we should. All right, everyone, that is our show for this week. Hope you enjoyed it. There's a really great conversation you can check out on the Big Ideas Book Club with Mike Madrid. He's written a very important book about Latinos in America, this, the largest group now in California, demographically, huge factor in our society. Lots to discuss there. We had a great conversation, and I hope you check it out, Big Ideas Book Club. And remember, of course, to come back here to listen to the next episode of The Steve Hilton Show. We're on Apple, YouTube, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, and we will see you back here soon.